Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I think I'll get straight into it with the constraints and time. So, a parent once said to me, "If you can't help me, then who can?" And that led our school down a pathway. Our school, I'll still call it our school, even though I'm retired, because it's easier that way. So our school was called Our Lady of Good Counsel Special School. It was established in 1957, one of the first special schools in Ireland, I think of 3 that were established at the time, and moved to new premises in 2002. For children, categorised as for children with moderate learning disability, who were kind of a historically relatively homogenous group, not really experiencing huge challenging behaviours. But over time, 68 students are now enrolled, aged from 4 to 18, of which 42 are now diagnosed with multiple disabilities. And a number of those students, I think it's about 7 at the moment, present with high or very high support needs in terms of behaviours, which present dangers to themselves or others. The school is lucky to have fairly reasonable multidisciplinary support from the Brothers of Charity, which many schools I know do not have. So just to give you a picture that these are real people we're talking about, here are some of our students doing their cooking, their shopping, out in the community and doing their history lessons. 10 years ago, just after I became principal, we started to see something new happening. We started to see that teaching and learning for almost all pupils was becoming significantly affected. There were safety concerns regarding the pupils and staff. Suspensions started to occur, short ones, but suspensions nonetheless. And worryingly also, alterations to length of school day were occurring. And I know many parents here will be experiencing that in their schools. Aside from the pupils, of course, and the staff and parents feeling very, very vulnerable, boards of management were also very vulnerable. And maybe some of you here are on boards of management and realise the feeling that brings. How do we respond at the time? We applied for additional teacher and SNA support, which at the time actually was more forthcoming than it is now. We rearranged our classes. We tried to think outside the box. We tried to be creative. We tried to rearrange the classes so that the children could better cope with groups and so on. We looked at the physical environment of the school, of the classes. We tried to create areas, station teaching, comfort rooms. We did not have time-out rooms, but we did have comfort rooms, quiet areas, sensory rooms, and all of that. We resisted the notion of a time-out room. We looked for supportive professionals from wherever we could get them, be they the SESS, the NSAC, whoever we could think of. We asked for their support. We developed individual education plans, which were new enough at the time, and behaviour support plans. We tried to skill ourselves in the whole area of developing individual behaviour support plans for the children, which at the time, 10, 12 years ago, was really not happening. We looked at our general curriculum. We tried to modify it. We looked at the curriculum for the seniors versus the one for the juniors. We looked at the one that children with high support were trying to access and so on. And we tried to adapt that where we could. We were careful to try and avoid a kind of a demand situation that was putting stress on the children. And we looked very carefully at our teaching methodologies and our strategies. We tried to find out what was best practice, what was new, what was out there, and take some from the old as well. And we sought every opportunity to get training. The SESS at the time were outstanding, helping us in that area. However, whilst it helped maybe 65 of the children, there were still a small, I'll call them a subgroup of 2 or 3 students whom we were not adequately supporting. Serious incidents involving violent behaviours continued. Teaching and learning in the classes that those children were in continued to be disrupted, and other classes as well, because we found we had to draw staff from other classes to support these children, which in turn affected the classes that the staff were drawn from. Staff were reporting a lack of direction and a lack of confidence. And most worryingly, increasingly staff found themselves beginning to use restrictive practices and physical interventions to keep pupils and staff safe in emergency situations. Now, I'm not talking about prone restraints or seclusion or anything close to that, but nonetheless, there were restrictive practices and physical interventions. So this won't move on. Okay. Then some significant things happened. There was a school self-evaluation process which we are required to do once a year. And normally I, as principal, would meet the staff, and I would be there with my folders and my information and my research. And I would expect staff to say, well, we need to work on our literacy programme, we need to work on numeracy, there are problems with this area of the curriculum and so on. Let's look at our yard supervision, all the usual type of things you hear from a staff at a staff meeting. And we started that way and everything was fine. And then one teacher, not in any way aggressively or anything, she just said, all of these ideas you're sharing are fantastic, but I can't do any of them in my class. I mean, if you're telling me to bring a new literacy programme into the class, I can't even do the old one, let alone try and bring in a new one. And that's a very serious thing for a principal to hear. If you hear a teacher saying, I can't teach, was what she was telling me. And I knew it anyway, I suppose. I mean, really, I wasn't sitting in my office not aware of what's going on in the school, but to hear it verbalised so clearly was quite a shock at the same time. She said, I spend most of my time either outside of the room managing and trying to cope and help the child with serious challenging behaviour, or I'm in the classroom, but the two SNAs who are supposed to be helping me supporting the other children are outside with the child who has serious challenging behaviour, and I'm worrying about them. So that set me back quite a bit to thinking, as well as that the comment of the parent that I opened the presentation with had been said to me around that time as well. This particular student was, I mean, if I'm being honest, I mean, it was really stopping the school in her tracks with the behaviours that we were experiencing. And we were coming close to saying it's time to expel the child or suspend the child. Went and brought the parent in to speak to her to start the whole process, and that is what she said to me. And again, as a principal, that's, you kind of sit there, well, I could see where she was coming from. If you can't help me, who can? Because she knew that if the child left my school, there was no place else to go. It would have been okay if I could say, look, our school isn't managing, we don't have the resources, etc., but here is a school that can and can help you. But there was no place for this person to go. Around that time too, child protection and anti-bullying, the procedures were given to us by the Department of Education, and we were all trying to follow all of those, and of course all these things very necessary and very important to do. But staff started to say to me, a bit like you said there earlier, what about the other children? What about the children who are sitting observing this, who are witnessing this, who are looking at this? One teacher reported that I have children in my class and they're afraid. They're afraid of the behaviour of this child. They're afraid to sit near them. They're afraid coming to school in the morning. And again, as you can imagine, as principal 10 years ago, these were terribly worrying things to hear. And I don't want to paint a picture that our school is a terrible place to be. These were, I mean, most of the time things were wonderful, but when things went wrong, they went seriously wrong. And we felt this was a crisis situation in the school at the time. So what do? We asked ourselves, what is really happening in our school in relation to physical interventions? Because we identified this is probably the most worrying area that we must start at. And do we have procedures and policies to guide staff? So we talked to the staff, we talked to the parents, we talked to some of the students who could voice an opinion, but in our school that wouldn't have been very many. But mostly the parents, the board of management and the staff, including SNAs, bus escorts and anyone else that would talk to us. And we developed this table. We said, where are we touching children? Where are we using physical contact with children? Where is it okay and where is it not? Where do we have policies? Where do we not? So we looked at, if you looked at the 4 columns, the first one is curriculum. And I mean, I'm sure as parents you'll agree for PE and drama and music and those type of subjects, teachers have to use physical interventions, if you like, with a child to guide them and to teach them and to help them and to support them and so on. PE, sensory programs, teachers can't be hands off all of the time. Reassurance and comfort. I'm sure you'll agree, of course, teachers must place their hand on a child for reassurance and comfort. A pat on the arm or a shoulder for praise or for reassurance must be done. Any school that does not do that, I would challenge, is not a good place to be. Holding the hand of an upset child walking in from the yard. I'm sure as parents you want staff to do that. High fives and hugs. Were these okay? When was a high five okay? When was a hug okay? Is a hug ever okay? Sitting on laps, the young children sitting on the SNA's laps and all that, is that okay? And if it is, and if we say it's okay, do we have procedures and policies so that it looks okay and that it is okay? So we were okay there. We said, yeah, we're okay. We have procedures, policies, and we've guidelines for all of those. Cleaning cuts, lifting a child down from a height, toileting, dressing, all of that. Do we need to lay our hands on a child for that? Of course we do. Then we had the other kind of restrictions, the non-contact restrictions, high handles on some doors, coded access and locks to prevent access to places like the staff room with the hot water, or the chemical cupboard with the dangerous cleaning chemical, toilet, harnesses on transport. Some of our children, the OTs had recommended harnesses to prevent children unlocking their seatbelts and standing up in the buses. And then the fences around the yards. We had our school yard, but there was a gate out onto a field which led out onto a road, so there was a padlock on that. And again, this was all done in consultation with parents, and parents expected the schools to put those restrictions in to keep their children in general safe and to keep them within the school building, because many of our children would be likely to abscond. Then we had the area where force was used, and I'm deliberately using the word force. Were we using force anywhere? And we said, yes, we are. If a child grabbed another child or a staff member by the hair, which happened occasionally, well then staff would have to disengage by moving the child's fingers off the child's head. Is that force? Well, yes, it is, if you look at that. Transitioning an unwilling child to a safer place. So we had a situation where one child scaled the fence, was leaning over the fence. It was, the fence with a kind of a spiky top. There was a busy road at the other end. And all the staff member could do was hold the child by the ankle until somebody came to help and get the child off the fence. Would you as parents expect us to do that? I think from a duty of care point of view, you absolutely would. If we stood back and said, sorry, can't touch the child scaled the fence, and next thing the child's out in the middle of the road, we would be very negligent in our duty of care. So yes, we said we are doing that. Not very often, no. But once in the year it might happen, but you still would have to do it. Breaking up a fight. If one child grabs another child by the neck or by the hair or whatever, would you expect staff, especially if you were the parent of the other child who's being grabbed, would you expect staff to do something about it? I'm sure you do. So there would be an element of force involved there. Removing a weapon, and I don't mean guns or knives, but that can be a weapon in the hands of somebody who intends to throw it at you. This can be a weapon in the hands of somebody who tends maybe to stick it in your eye or something. So yes, would you expect staff to take that from the child who was going to do that? I think you would. And yes, am I using force by doing that? Yes, I am. And then the whole area of restraint, isolation and seclusion. We had some concerns there. Again, not to the level of any degree that you were talking about. But yes, the incidences were happening on a rare occasion, but yes, they were happening. 1 second, I'll go on to the next one. So did we have procedures and policies for that area? That area, the last column, we felt, no, we do not. We do not have it written down what we're going to do. We don't have policies. We don't have training. Everyone was doing their best, but everyone was nervous when they did have to put their hands on a child for whatever reason that might be. We asked ourselves then, what do we want for our children to experience in the school? And if I had time to ask you here, I know what you would say would be, we want our children to be cared for, we want them to be safe, we want them to be treated with dignity, respect. We want the staff to be skilled, we want the staff to know what they are doing. That's why we're sending them to school in the first place. And way down the line is actually education, because you can't do the education piece if all of the others aren't present before it. And entertainment. We want our child to enjoy being in school. We want fun. We want them to get on the bus with a smile on their face in the morning. So what do? We sourced training. That's the first thing we did. Now, we had to pay for to be fair, the SESS at the time paid for it, but they're not anymore, unfortunately, because too many schools are looking for it. But at the time, we were one of the first to go looking for it, and they did pay for training for us. Only for that, we would have been really sunk, because it is, terribly expensive. That was grand. We trained all the staff, but I hear people saying you must train the staff, but it actually was not enough, because when we came up to a situation where there was a dispute, or not even a dispute, or a question, but how did we do that right? Was that the right way to do it? Everybody was an equal when it came to the training. Nobody knew better than anybody else. If I'm making myself clear, we had no one to say, oh, did we do the right thing there? Because there was no oversight, there was no one to talk to. So we trained 2 of the teachers, myself being one, to be tutors in the type of training that we were delivering to the staff, which turned out to be a fantastic thing, because what happened then was when new staff came in, we could train them on site, on the spot, or at least within a reasonable length of time, rather than waiting months and months and months and months for a new training regime to come in. We developed a pupil support team ourselves, and again we had to draw from our existing staff. We were not given any additional staff, which was very disappointing. So we ended up in agreement with the parents of increasing the numbers in some class, so we could release, in some classes, to release teachers and SNAs to become a kind of a behaviour support group, if I'm making sense, you know. But all the parents agreed we prefer to have a bigger class that was a calmer class than smaller classes with children in it who were disturbing everybody else. Oh dear. We began the process of developing highly individualised, personalised programmes, I'm going to go really fast, in terms of environment, timetable, curriculum, which was proactive, and planned responses to behaviours, which was reactive. And we focused on communication and prevention. We were lucky to have a great speech therapist. We also began the process of developing our own policies, our own procedures, and our own guidance in the absence of any from others. So we looked to England and Northern Ireland, and we did that. We learned the principles of best practice. We taught very carefully to the staff that any sort of restrictive practice which came from a punishment or a sanction or a consequence mindset was always unlawful. The safety and welfare of the children was centre stage. Is what we are doing in the best interest of the child? We wrote that down, we put it at the top of every single classroom. Last resort, if you were using a restrictive practice, it had to be last resort. You had to try de-escalation, diffusion and diversion first. Maximum care and then minimum restrictive practices had to be the culture and the order of the day. This could not be a routine response to a behaviour. Absolutely not. It had to be an exceptional response. And what you had to do, that if you did have to engage in a restrictive practice, it had to be reasonable, proportionate and necessary. We implemented the principles of best practice. We researched, developed our own policy, developed our own system of oversight with the Board of Management, monitored, reviewed, reported at board level. We did the best we could there. We consulted with psychologists and multi-D people. We made out our own behaviour support plans, which we now call risk reduction plans. We agreed those with the parents involved and the multidisciplinary team, and these were very, very personalised, very individual and very, very different for each child. And we used a multi-element approach. We looked at the function of behaviour, why was the behaviour happening, skills teaching the teachers in diffusion, diversion and de-escalation, and prevention. Mood management became a huge thing, exercise and trying to keep the children's moods and minds happy and content. Self-regulation, I suppose, if you like. What changed? Increased levels of confidence amongst the school community to discharge their duty of care to all pupils. Skills of diversion, diffusion, de-escalation were increased. Situations were being resolved most of the time without the need for physical intervention, and that was reducing all of the time. Clear guidance and strategies to reduce risk where it was foreseeable that a physical intervention was necessary to safeguard the safety of self and others were there for staff. Unfortunately, the current situation is that schools are still waiting for governmental guidance and oversight. And as you said, Mark, we've been asking for that from our school for nearly 12 years now. Reports of bad practice are leading to media attention now, and that's highlighting the issue. And maybe that's a good thing, or maybe it's fueling fear as well. Morale in some schools is an issue, and they're struggling to manage. Lack of guidance leads to confusion. That leads to bad practice, and that leads to distrust from parents and staff. Good guidance directs towards best practice, and that fosters confidence, not only in staff, but also with parents. The reality for schools, in my own opinion, is that schools cannot avoid using physical contact. There should not be a no-contact policy. Physical interventions, restrictive practices are part of the solution to keep children and staff safe in emergency situations where violent or aggressive behaviour is the norm. Risks cannot be eliminated. If we try to think that we're going to eliminate the risks, then we won't get anywhere. But they can be reduced and they can be managed. And most importantly of all, high support pupils need a wraparound, intensive, multidisciplinary response from the system, not just from education, but from welfare and from health as well, supporting not only the school, but the parents and the family members at home as well. Because these children, which is another whole issue, are getting no respite, no home support, no this, no that, the other. And that is part of the solution to the problem. So the reality is that most schools at ground level are trying to develop and provide individual responses tailored to the child's needs, trying their best to keep the pupils in school. Staff are dealing with complex, high-intensity, high-risk situations too often. Resources such as staffing, space, support and time to plan are stretched to their upper limits. The Board of Managements are dealing with safety, welfare, administrative, financial and legal situations that they are just not qualified to deal with. And there's a big challenge of inclusion for these pupils. Nearly done. A lot has been done by various groups. I won't name them all out, Inclusion Ireland and others and so on. And I'm delighted to see the National Parents Council is getting in on the act here, because I think you are probably one of the most relevant groups here and who can achieve an awful lot. But for this group of pupils, schools need to be better supported by the system in terms of lawful policy guidance and training for staff. Pupils need flexible, sensible, integrated, personalised resource allocation. Is it an urgent, emotional, complex issue requiring a measured response from all partners? Absolutely. I go back to our first sentence. If you can't help, then who can? So we need to move this conversation along, and quickly. Thank you for listening.